Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and we are coming to you today from Hatch in downtown Fairhope, and we appreciate Rick Miller opening up his space to us to record the podcast today. And if you want to find out more about Hatch and what they do, you can go to their website at hatchfairhope.com. Our guest today is Dr. Frank Wang, and he is an internist at Fairhope Internal Medicine, and we appreciate Dr. Wang being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Doc. Thanks. So I've got to ask, I put your profession up there with several that I think are true callings, educators and people in healthcare. So tell me how you got to be where you are today. I mean, what have you always had a love for medicine? Is it something that you always wanted to do growing up, or how did you end up being a doctor?
It's an interesting path. Growing up, my parents were first-generation immigrants, so they pushed education, and They would see, I think, as with most first-generation immigrants, education and professional jobs as the key.
Okay.
And so they kind of lean that way. And during that path of education and whatnot, I guess it's exposure. And it turned out I tend to fit what I'm doing now as far as trying to help navigate in the healthcare, help people down the right path. And it felt like a good match. And there's different types of healthcare, but the one that I ended up landing with was good. So we grew up in Huntsville in North Alabama. Mm-hmm. A lot of opportunities there for exposure, and then went to school at undergrad over at Emory, where there's a bunch of exposure, right next door to CDC and whatnot, and so just kept pursuing it, and ended up back at Mobile at South Alabama, and then just stayed here since then.
Okay, great. Yeah. And I want to get this out of the way real quick, but I would feel like I wasn't doing my job if I didn't ask you this question, since we are in the midst of this COVID-19 thing. What is your take? Obviously, you've seen, I'm sure, a lot of people who've been infected, and what's the outlook as far as do you have any thoughts on the length, how long it's going to be around, how it's going to go away? Is it going to go away? Is it going to end up being like the flu at some point where we have everybody just takes their COVID-19, vaccine every year and that kind of thing? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting. When I ask other colleagues that have been doing this a lot longer than I have, it's very interesting because it's become a very polarizing circumstance. They reference all the way back to Spanish flu, and similarities and pandemics all the way back then. But right now in this current world, part of the challenge is the world's gotten smaller, travel's easier, and that's part of the spread. And for the virus itself, a big part of it is there's a big question mark. And that most of the time just takes time to sift through. So I think as a population, we're going to have to power through the end of 2020. Some of the harder hit places, or places that were hit earlier, harder, like New York, California, as far as in the United States, their numbers seem to be trending. So there's some evidence of maybe, quote, running its course, but it's true. It's a big unknown, and the vaccinations typically take 18 plus months, 2 years to get through all the typical trials, and they're really pushing it. It's a unique situation where the whole world's trying to push for a vaccine at the same time, so it may help with that. But there's the question mark: is the vaccine, how effective is it going to be? Is it going to be like the flu, where there's such a high rate of mutation that you got to keep on top of it every year? So just too many unknowns. You do the best you can, and I just tell myself and others, we manage our own little bubble.
I guess that's all you can do at this point. But I have a lot of admiration for you guys that are on the front lines dealing with this, because I know it's something like I don't think any of us have ever dealt with before, obviously, and you guys are just like the rest of us. So
yeah, and part of the challenge is it seems like recommendations keep changing every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so trying to find some plan to educate ourselves and others about is always difficult.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's talk about leadership. That's why we're here. So let me just start with the basic question. How do you define a leader? What makes a person a good leader in your view?
Personally, I've never thought of myself to be a leader in the sense that first one to raise my hand to, jump forward and do something.
Yeah.
But over my time frame, I think the biggest thing about a leader is understanding, empathy, open to learn. I think I've not always been in a position of leadership. Kind of over the course of my path and journey, I've kind of fallen to that and kind of learned how to do that. And part of the challenge is learning how to motivate others, empower others. So I think those are the qualities you need. You need empathy, constant learning, and then always trying to help others.
Yeah, we talked with Sydney, who was the owner of True Therapy and Yoga, and she mentioned that as well, lifelong learning. You know, which I totally agree with. I think that if you're not willing to learn something, you know, even every day, that you can't really be an effective leader.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's very easy to get, and I find myself sometimes falling into that too, is getting complacent. You know, everything's coasting on pretty good, but time keeps going, things keep changing.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let me ask you this, and I've asked this question before, and it's one of the boxes you actually checked on the show primer, but so you said that you haven't always viewed yourself necessarily as the one who's always jumping up to say, hey, I want to be the leader, but so do you think that leaders are born or are they made?
I think, and others have probably said this, it's going to be both.
Yeah.
Because the way I look at it is everyone's got certain qualities that they are born with. And if an individual is lucky enough to match those qualities in a situation where they can thrive, that's very synergistic. And that was what pushes people to do great things. And biggest challenge in life in the world right now is being able to hone in and find what your better abilities are or what your talents are, and then be able to match that with a circumstance or situation where you can accelerate that. And you know, some people that matches up great, and I think that's where big success stories come from, is when those two things match, the energy and the productivity is just exponential.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, synergy is absolutely important on a team. What do you think, in your view, makes someone a good team member? And I'm not necessarily talking about leader versus follower or vice versa, but I'm talking about somebody that is in a group of people that are all pulling in the same direction. What makes some teams more effective than others? And can you point out a quality or two that you think are inherent in someone who is a good team member to be able to develop those synergies that you just talked about?
Yeah, I think, and I probably pulled this out from the various podcasts or YouTube videos that I watch, and so I can't remember where it exactly came from, but I think it's when you're a part of the team, you just look to the person next to you and say, what can I do to bring that person up, or what can I do to help that person? And if everyone did that, then the team as a whole doesn't really have to think too hard. Everyone's helping each other get to that common goal, and having some sort of set goal, even if it's a short-term goal, helps that, and it just kind of puts a target out there. But as far as being a good team member, it overlaps with leadership. I think leadership is not necessarily a rank or a position, but the choices. And so, as part of a team, every part of that team it has some sort of what you could say is a leadership choice that they have to make. And so, a big part of that in teamwork, I think, is still going to be just looking at your teammates next to you and say, what can I do to bring that one up? And then I think that automatically builds that up.
Yeah, that's a great point. Was medical school very collaborative? I mean, or was there a lot of individual type work? I'm asking because the trend in business schools these days, or it was when I was in college, and that's been 25 years ago now, so maybe it's changed again. But they were moving more toward this collaborative approach where we did a lot of teamwork, a lot of group projects. So you absolutely had to rely on the people on your team to be able to pull their weight, so you'd all be successful. Was it the same way in medical school, or was it more of an individualized?
No, when I
approach?
went through medical school, from a training standpoint, it was more individual. I kind of wish there was some sort of a business school type of approach looking back, because once you get out and try to practice medicine, there's a whole side of the business and medicine that most, myself included, didn't know much about. And a lot of medical students in my time, and I think it's more prevalent now, medicine was not their first career. Okay. And so some came from other backgrounds, and you can kind of see that, the way they may approach problems and whatnot, where myself was just kind of, I went through the usual track, 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, 3 or 4 years of residency, where others may have gone and run a business for a couple of years and decided they would call back whatever their calling was. And so medical school, I think, is still more of an individual type thing, just because there's also so many subspecialties. Yeah. And a lot of people going in have a target or an idea of what their end game is or end goal is. And where business school, I don't know, but I'm sure there's other subsets in business. But I think management is a big part of business school, and I don't think that's necessarily pushed on medicine.
No, I understand. That was kind of a backdoor way of asking this question, but I was just wondering if your experience in medical school maybe has changed your view of leadership over the years, or maybe how has your view of leadership changed over the years? I mean, I know that when we're at least when I was little. I mean, when I thought leader, I thought president or the head of the business or whatever. But as I've gotten older and have gotten in the real world, I realized that there are leaders at every level of an organization. So I'm just curious to know what your take is on that, and how has your view changed over the years?
Yeah, mine kind of similar to what you described. When I typically think of leader, I think of someone at the top of the podium saying main instructions or the goals or stating out. If you look at like Braveheart or something like that.
Yeah.
But over the course of time, life, whatever, it has changed a lot. I mean, like I said, I don't consider myself a born leader. It's an interesting story. When I started practice out of residency, say I started on a Monday, but then on a Wednesday, the person that had brought me on had to be hospitalized. And then it was just me in the office kind of figuring out what to do. It kind of goes back to, what choices do you need to make now? What can you lean back on? And just from there, just been growing and learning and adapting. But that was a big eye-opener, going from always taking instruction to everyone starting to look at you. So like, what do we do next?
Right.
And so from there, learning that there are multiple levels of leadership. And then through this pandemic, the hospital has a huge organization, but they also set aside subsets and task force and those type of things. And every single one of them have qualities that are needed to help with the community. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned or observed is it's not that one person at the top. It's everybody.
Yeah, no doubt. And so having good examples, I think, is key, and I think that's what you're talking about. So let's talk about that. Can you point to a specific person or leader that you admire, or maybe a mentor that you've had in your career, in your life? Is there someone you can point to there?
Well, I think one of the baseline things in the background is always going to be family. But again, I never even thought about leadership. My life has just been about putting one foot in front of the other and not falling.
Yeah.
So I think the best way for me to answer that is I think each point in your life, there's someone that provides that guiding light, right? And so it just depends on where you are at that point in life. But there's always, I've been lucky enough that at each stage of my life, there has been someone to help put me under their wing. So I couldn't say that there was something specific. And now I'm at a point where with YouTube and podcasts and kind of like your podcast, there's just so many brilliant people out there and so many people to learn from. And I've never been a great reader. And so I've really loved the ideas of podcasts and videos to kind of learn and kind of absorb as much as I can. So,
well, and one thing that you said when we asked that question on the show primer, you said, I found that I try to latch on to the message and tend to forget the name or the person. And I thought that was, I love that. I thought that was awesome because, and we were talking about this with a guest a week or two ago, sometimes I think folks may get a little bit too caught up into the who that you're trying to either emulate or that you admire, and sometimes you lose your sense of self. But I think that if you can take those little nuggets and bits and pieces of wisdom and knowledge from those people and apply it to your own life, regardless of who it is, I think that's a great and effective way to do it.
That's a good way to put it. I'll try to remember that.
We're both learning something. That's good. So you mentioned not a big reader, which I'm sure you had to do tons of reading in medical school, so I'm sure that's a nice respite from having to do that now. But so podcasts or videos, I mean, do you have a podcast or a podcaster or two that you can throw out there for our listeners that has made an impact on you?
Nothing specific. The way I approach it is to stay open. I find if I latch onto a certain person or topic, then I miss the other side of things because they a lot of times will provide a point of view and then there's another point of view. And so I just try to keep it rotating and moving around. And with podcasts also, I just mix the topics around. Is it philosophical? Is it ideology? Is it medical? So to just kind of keep that rotation going. I really like podcasts because, like myself, if I'm a slow talker, I can always amp it up to 1.5 or whatnot to kind of get it going.
Right.
But because during work, I say I don't read a lot, but that's partly because all we're reading are medical reports, X-rays, and so I mean, I guess technically I'm reading a lot, but it's not not
for pleasure.
Right.
For your own, yeah, I got you. Well, I mean that goes along with lifelong learning, right? I mean, do you think you're a naturally curious person, or most doctors are you naturally?
I think curious? Most people are, but everything gets to a point where it gets harder.
Yeah,
and the moving forward depends on how much tolerance you have to kind of push yourself. But I think, to an extent, everyone's a lifelong learner. Myself, as far as like leadership and try to lead by example, work hard, If the office toilet needs changing, I'll just do it myself, those type of things. There's no task that's too small for you. And so if you look at it that way, you're always learning.
Yeah, good. I like that. Fairhope Internal Medicine is your practice. So as the leader of that organization, you kind of have to, chart the course, and people are looking to you for where that organization is going. So if you look forward 2 or 3 years, what do you see for Fairhope Internal Medicine, or what are your hopes for that organization?
Oh, well, I hope that we continue to do what we're doing. We're a private practice office like ours is less and less as far as in the medical field. A lot of them are either being absorbed or when you come out of residency, just to be employed by a larger medical group, which has its pros and cons on both sides. And so I think as a practice, we hope we can maintain our little niche as far as coziness, accessibility. And we've made some small adjustments within the practice to mix up our business model a little bit and see if that provides a better accessibility, both from a patient standpoint and a personal standpoint. But 5 years from now, I'm hoping we can maintain, and independence is always a great idea. As a kid, I always thought I would want to, quote, own a business, but never knew what that was going to be, and throughout life, I have no complaints. This is kind of where the journey has brought me. The goal is to kind of keep it going, and it's tough. You have your good days, bad days, conflicts, resolutions. The hardest part I found is finding good people and then keeping them close. I have been fortunate that good people have been around me, and where I'm at today, surrounded by good people, learn from them as well, and hopefully we just keep that good vibe going indefinitely.
Yeah, no doubt. So when you're not healing folks, what do you do for fun to decompress or just kind of blow some steam off?
Well, I got 2 kids. One's a 7-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl, and for some reason, the 7-year-old boy has picked up fishing and loves it, casting netting, fishing. So my chore every morning at 5 is he comes up and takes me out there. Every weekend at 5, I should say, he takes me and put me out there. And I think right now the biggest thing for spare time is spending time with family, because especially with this pandemic going on, but even before, interactions with patients that are 90, 100 years old, all the way to 50, even in 60s. A common theme that I get with interaction with patients is time flies, spend time with your family. And then a lot of times that overlapped also with some of the physicians that I've talked to that have been doing it for a while and said, time flies. You can't stick your head down and just work. Family is important too. So I've kind of, from both sides, from a professional side and from the patient side, that for some reason jumped out at me one day. So right now, I think that's my biggest goal, and I think a measure of, there's one question about measure of success. I think part of it is if you're being able to spend quality time with family.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you have never had anybody say in your office, I wish I'd spent less time with my kids, or I wish I had spent less time on family vacations, or less time around the dinner table, right? You just don't hear that kind of thing.
Right. And for some reason, there was a period of time where that particular conversation or vibe was there, and then I just happened to notice it. And, my wife sometimes reads these books about learning and philosophy and teaching kids, and one of them is your words are not life itself. So no matter how much you tell your kids something, it's not life. To them, it means nothing, right? Yeah. And you can carry that over to different aspects. Life is, if you're not ready to hear it, then it's just not there. And so sometimes situations happen where you just pay attention. If you're slow down enough and pay attention, somebody somewhere is trying to tell you something.
Yeah. Doc, I can't think of a better way to end the podcast. That is absolutely great insight, and I appreciate you so much for coming on and taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. It's been great. If folks want to find out more about Frank Wang and Fairhope Internal Medicine, where can they go?
We got our office right behind Thomas Hospital. They could always drop by or call. We don't really have a huge online Facebook presence or whatnot, but our office is right there, and if they have any questions related to the office, myself, they could always come by.
Okay. Doc, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Avizo Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avizogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.